Hi, this is Mad Cat, the angry egalitarian that discusses this and that. Today we will be looking at the Men's Rights Survey and Non-Feminist Women Survey, which will be an education into the minds of men and women who are basically non-feminist. As always, and remember that the answer to complex questions is often equally as complex. So, I saw this on Tumblr yesterday and kind of wanted to wait until we got to 200 responses, but I decided to go ahead and start now since the response rate seems to be a little bit slow. There will be a link down below, so if you have not taken this survey yet, pause this video, go take this survey because you're going to help the cause in taking this survey. Now, at this time, I only have about 175 responses. Well, I don't have it, someone else has it, but I'm reporting on 175. Now, that might seem like a small sample size. However, with a lot of research studies, that's actually quite a bit, especially when you look at feminist academic studies. They're usually pretty low. So this is actually a fair sample size, and there's a lot that we can learn from this. This is going to be a video series, and I'll explain later where some of the videos I'll be doing on this are going to be. But my plan is to get, if this gets to 250 responses, do another video result, getting to 350 and then 500. So we will kind of see how this progresses. So we got a lot to go over today, and this is going to be a really big education for men, women, men's rights, feminists, egalitarians. Everyone is going to learn something today. So strap yourself in and let's go over these results. Now, when you finish the survey, you're going to notice that my results are going to be a little bit skewed from yours, because every time someone takes the survey, it's going to change the results slightly. So I'm hoping that we get 1,000 people to take this, because if we can get 1,000, we can get a really good sample size. But I think there's a lot of truth that we can already see. So first we ask about sex, biological sex. Actually, let me load up my notes here, because I've done like detailed analysis on this. So 56% say they are male, 43% say that they are female, and 1% say that they are intersexed. Gender identity, 59% say they are male, 35% say they are female, and 6% say they're non-binary. Those who, I'm guessing, answer, well, no, this is asking everyone. Only 10% of the people stated that they are transgender. Everyone else basically said that they were not. Then it was asked, if you're transgendered, you can describe your identity further here. 5% said transgendered man, 2% transgendered woman, 2% gender queer, 1% gender fluid, 1% demi-girl, 2% non-binary, 1% agendered, and then 5% said that those didn't describe what they are. So you are free to look up the terms of those. While they are important, I don't really have time to discuss what each of those are. Some of this I'll be skipping over just to save time. What is your sexual orientation? 47% say heterosexual. 7% say homosexual. 26% say bisexual. 6% for pansexual. 2% for polysexual. 9% for asexual. 2% for demisexual, and then 1% for everything else. Basically what wasn't mentioned there. So surprisingly, Almost half was heterosexual, and 1/4 was bisexual. And that represents about 75% of this test, of this survey. So that's rather interesting. I thought there would be more homosexuals than bisexuals, but this is actually good because bisexuals do come under fire a lot, both by heterosexuals and homosexuals. One could consider that pansexuality and polysexuality is part of bisexuality. I don't. I understand why people might, but there's a different mindset in each of these. So that's why I think it's good that it separates these out. Romantic orientation. 55% said that they were heteroromantic, 9% homoromantic, 20% said biromantic, 7 panromantic, 3 polyromantic, 4% is aromantic, and then 2% was none of the above. So once again, we're seeing 75% is represented by heteroromantic and biromantic. That is quite interesting. Then there's where do you live, 65, North America, 26, Europe, 5% Australia, Oceanic, 2% for Asia and South America, and 0% from Africa. Age brackets. 10% are between the ages of 13 and 16, 35 are between 17 and 20, 31 is between 21 and 25, 13 is 26 to 30, 6% is 31 to 35, which is where I'm at, and then 4% from 36 to 45, 4%, and then 1% over 51. So we've got a good sampling across the board, but it looks like most of it is between 17 and 30 is where our main concentration of people are at. Racial, 83% white, 8% Hispanic, 7% Black, 6% Asian, 3% Native, 1% Pacific Islander, and 1% none of the above. So before we continue further, one thing that we can draw is that we've got someone in their early adulthood. The majority of the people taking this are early in their adulthood, that they are cis male, white, and straight. And that is the majority of the people taking this test based on these statistics. I can't see individual results, so it's hard for me to determine how accurate that statement is, but that's what it seems. This is the combination that is most hated on the internet, especially on Tumblr. And this is where the education is really going to begin for us, is that we're going to see what the majority of the people on this survey think. Now, we are also represented by an almost equal amount of women that are hetero-minded, but there's also a good representation of bisexual, biromantic people. So let's go ahead and continue. Now, this describes religion. I'm just going to really read this part, but not discuss the other, where it kind of fine-tunes what kind of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, what have you. This was surprising. Well, I guess not too surprising, but just kind of like a nice welcome surprise. So 68% of taking this survey identified as non-religious, atheism, agnosticism, indifferent. 13 Christianity, 9% was none of the above, and then everything else was less than 10%, actually less than 5%, which was Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, paganism, Taoism, and then Shintoism and Hinduism got 0%. So some interesting results. Let's go ahead and skip ahead from all the religious stuff. You're welcome to take a look at it yourself, but I don't think it's too pertinent. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the issues that men face. Circumcision is the religious right of parents. Now, this was a 1 through 5, 5 being very, 4 being slight, 3 being somewhat, 2 being less right, and 1 being not right at all. You basically get it, but I went ahead and divided it down that 4 and 5 is basically a yes, 3 is a somewhat, and 1 and 2 is a no. So the answer to this question, circumcision is a religious right of parents. 5% said yes, 11% said somewhat, and 85% said no, that this is not a religious right. Circumcision is a type of genital mutilation. 83% said yes, 8% said somewhat, and 9% said no. So, this is a major issue within the men's right movement, that, circumcision is genital mutilation, and it does a lot of damage to males. And I'm happy to see that 83% of people who participated agree with this. All right, men have less reproductive and birth control options than women. 75% said yes, 14% for somewhat, and 11% for no. Boys are less affected by dress codes than girls. 27 said yes, 26 said somewhat, and 46% said no. Know that they are not less affected by it. Oh, I kind of disagree with this, in all honesty, because men are basically given strict options of usually wearing pants, especially in the work environment. Women actually have a lot more choices, but they always scream, "It's oppression." Yeah, because you get to wear like a skirt, you get to wear pants. You don't have to wear a button-up shirt. You can wear a blouse. Women actually have a lot more options than men. Men are usually delegated to wearing dress slacks, button-up shirt. Sometimes the tie is optional. Sometimes it's a requirement. And this is basically what we have to wear. Women do have a lot more options. But this is actually asking, are they less affected by it? And I think... I guess no in this case is that they are more affected by it. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking now. All right, let's move on. Men and boys who are rape victims are underrepresented in the media. An astounding 96% said yes. 3% said somewhat, 1% said no. That 1% was on a 2. 0% said 1. Men and boys with mental illness are underrepresented in the media. 69% said yes, 23% said somewhat, 8% no. Women who have affairs with underage students should not be convicted. 4% said yes. Oh, you poor people. 3% said somewhat, and 93% said no. No, that they shouldn't be convicted. So basically, it's a yes that they should be convicted. And yeah, that's another issue we have, is that women mostly get a slap on the wrist, especially teachers who have sex with underage students. They should be convicted as equally as men are convicted for the same offense. Women who rape men or boys are not rapists. 0% said yes, 0% said somewhat, 100% said no. So that women who rape men and boys are rapists. I know the CDC and several other states have arranged it so women cannot be seen as rapists by this court of law, but they are rapists. Women who perpetrate crimes are not as bad as men who do the same thing. Basically, 100% said no, but there was less than 1% that said yes, that gave a 5. So, like, the numbers are those who said 1 was 171, 2, 3, and then 5 was 1. So, it's basically like greater than 99% and less than 1%. So, women are less capable of violence than men. 2% said somewhat, 97% said no. Men and boys who are forced into sex are lucky. 100% said no, they are not lucky. Women are better parents than men. 1% said yes, 11% said somewhat, 88% said no. That's another major issue, where this is more of a cultural bias that our society seems to have, and this is something that we need to change. Because men are as capable as being parents as women, and in certain situations, men are more capable than women. In certain situations, women are more capable than men. These are usually an indication that one parent is abusive than the other. However, the family court looks at it as women are always better than men, even if the woman is abusive. And this is a cultural injustice that we need to fix in the men's rights movement. The feminists should be also focusing on that too, but then that takes away power from the women. All men are rapists unless taught otherwise in school. 100% said no to that. Yeah, feminists. Boys interested in fields associated with women are generally met with encouragement from parents, the media, and schools. 5% said yes, 13% said somewhat, 82% said no. These are fields such as teaching, which has now become a female-dominated field, because any man who goes in there is more likely to be accused of molesting or raping a student, or gets a lot of harassment from parents, or things like being a male nurse, or even a stewardess, or flight attendant, actually they're called. I mean, you do see them. They are in there, but they're not really encouraged from parents. It's like, well, why can't you do a man's job? So it's another cultural bias that we need to work on. Boys who prefer to play with toys associated with girls are met with hostility from their parents. 82% said yes, well, parents and media in school. 82% yes, 13% somewhat, 5% no. Academic fields associated with men are better. Academic fields associated with men are better than academic fields associated with women. Basically, the fields that men go into are better than the fields that women go into. 14% said yes, 31% said somewhat, and 55% said no. I think that could use some work from men's right and egalitarians. Kind of take the 45% that said somewhat in yes and kind of bring them to no. I think this warrants more discussion. That we have almost an equal amount saying, no, somewhat yes, with 55 saying no, but it's still encouraging that the majority is saying no to this question. Only girls suffer from eating disorders. 99% said no, 1% said somewhat. Rape culture exists. 14% said yes, 14% said somewhat, and 73% said no. Now, I'm going to go on the record and say that I disagree that rape culture doesn't exist. I actually think it does. However, I think that this question is more asking about the feminist narrative of what rape culture is. And that I agree that no, it doesn't actually exist. But the fact that our society sees that men cannot be raped, that's rape culture. Or that men are laughed at when they say they are raped, that's rape culture. But if we only look at it as the feminist perspective of what rape culture is, they're going to say no. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some feminist who comes across this and says, like, well, see, this is proof why we need feminism, because 73% of the men say that rape culture doesn't exist. Yeah, watch, that's going to happen. Men and boys cannot be victims of sexism. 97% said no, that they can be victims of sexism. 2% somewhat, 1% yes. There is no need for male domestic violence shelters. 97% said no, 1% for somewhat, and 2% for yes. So yeah, we do need male domestic violence shelters. There are not enough strong female leads in the media. 40% said yes, 18% somewhat, and 42% said no. So maybe this warrants further discussion, since there seems to be a balance between yes and no on this one, and somewhat just being in the middle. So, I don't know how I feel about this. I would have to do further study on it to really see where the line is drawn on this. But I don't know. I see women often, especially on like Fox News and MSNBC. So it seems like they're there. And then we're starting to get a lot of female politicians in place, especially Hillary Clinton making news because of her running for president. Video games do not sexualize men. 77% said no, 17% somewhat, 7% yes. So the astounding amount of survey takers say that video games do sexualize men, and I 100% agree with that. You know, feminists and anti-Gamergate are always talking about how video games sexualize women and that sexism exists in video games. Well, I actually agree that sexism exists in video games, but it's not just for women, it's also men that it exists for. So I'm happy to see that a large number of people agree with me. Men raped in jail deserve it. 99% said no. Only 1% said somewhat, and that's sad that someone said somewhat. Rape is rape, and it's bad no matter what, but I have seen some feminists out there say that men do deserve to be raped, and that's just abhorrent. There are not enough body-positive campaigns for men and boys. 82% said yes, 12% somewhat, and 6% no. I actually agree with this, that there's not enough out there. The only things we see is these Gatorade commercials with these men with rippling muscles, and that's just a very poor body image, in all honesty, because very few people could ever get that. Now, you can say the same about women, that you only see super hot models on there, and it sets kind of an impossible standard. I agree. But there are more things in works for women having more of a positive body image than men do. And we need to see a bit more for men and boys. Men and boys issues are routinely ignored by the general public or population. 90% yes, 6% somewhat, 5% no. Okay, women are paid equally for the same work. 78% said yes, 12% somewhat, 9% no. Now, this is talking mostly about the wage gap, and it's been debunked several times. I'm glad that nearly 80% of the survey takers agree with this. I do think that it might exist in isolated circles, but I'll just tell everyone that if you can prove that you're getting paid less than you should be, it's an against the law. You need to sue that company to correct that injustice. Seriously. All right. I agree with Gamergaters. 65% said yes, 27% somewhat, 7% no. Toys like Barbie negatively affect the aspirations and or self-esteem of girls. 60% no, 22% somewhat, 18% yes. I'm kind of in the somewhat camp. It does set an impossible standard for girls that, you have to be this beautiful. But I don't think it necessarily affects their aspirations. So, but I can understand where some will say no and where some will say yes. Okay, so multiple choice answers. So for this, we have how socially disadvantaged do you believe men and women are? So it basically goes like men are a lot more socially disadvantaged than women, slightly more. Men and women are equally social. Women are slightly more. Women are a lot more. So I broke it down into the men camp, the women camp, and both on who is more socially disadvantaged. 40% say men, 26% say women are more disadvantaged, and 34% say both. Okay, so legally disadvantaged. 78% say men are legally disadvantaged than women. 14% say both are about equal. Only 8% say that women are more disadvantaged than men. Feminists, I really hope you're listening to this because this is some very important things. This is the perception that people taking the survey have. I'm sure you'll admit whatever narrative you want, but I really hope you're listening to this. Who do you believe is treated poor when they do not adhere to traditional gender roles? I didn't break this up into camps, but men are treated poor, 71%. Men and women are treated equally poor, only 24%. Women are treated poor, 3%, and neither are treated poor, 2%. Do you believe that the backlash men receive for stepping out of male gender roles can be attributed to misogyny? 73% said no, 23% said somewhat. Do you believe that society hates femininity, even when expressed by a woman? 82% said no, 16% said somewhat. I'm just going to read the top two of the three. So, do you believe that men actively created the patriarchy? 83% no, 14% said somewhat. I wish this asked more about the establishment as well as the patriarchy. Do you believe patriarchy developed due to evolutionary reasons? 38% said no, 39% said somewhat, 23% said yes. Do you believe that women should be candidates for military draft? 85% said yes, and I agree. If you're going to make men eligible for drafts, you need to make women eligible for drafts, especially now that they can be frontline soldiers. Do you hate women? The feminists are always saying, oh, well, the men's right movement just hates women. Well, here's your chance to find out, feminists. 98% said, drum roll, ding, no, they do not hate women. oh my God, this means that the feminists are wrong. So 98% of the people taking this test that basically don't identify as feminists and may also define themselves as the men's rights activists do not, in an astounding way, hate women. Do you believe men are better than women? 97% said no. Do you believe that women are better than men? 100% said no. Do you believe misandry exists? So 30% said yes on an individual level. 68% said yes on both an individual and an institutional level, 0 for institutional level only, and 2% for no. So basically about 98% believes that misandry exists in some form or fashion. Do you believe misogyny exists? 39% on an individual level, 1% on an industrial level, institutional level, and 58% for both. 2% said no. So, people taking the survey believe that both misandry and misogyny exist. How prevalent are misandry and misogyny? So this once again kind of goes into the camps: misogyny, misandry, both, and neither. 27% believe that misogyny is more prevalent than misandry. 32% believe that misandry is more prevalent than misogyny. 39% believe that both are about equal to each other, and only 1% believe that neither are prevalent. Do you think there are people who support men's rights who are extreme, radical, or harmful? This is actually a very good question. They didn't ask the same about feminism, but still a very good question. 70% said yes, 18% somewhat. All right, if you answered yes to the question above, do you address these people? Do you call them out? 22 said yes, 45% said maybe sometimes. I try to. I don't encounter too many of them because my focus is elsewhere, but if someone is being a fucktard, I'm going to call them out on it. If you answered yes to the above question, where do you see people most often? 61%. Well, this doesn't equal up to 100% here. So basically 107 people said mostly or entirely online. So how prevalent do you think men's right radicals are? So when we take a look at this, it's basically very prevalent, moderately rare, and very rare. Kind of weird answering, but okay. So I'm breaking this up between prevalent and rare. Prevalent says that 24% say it's prevalent, with 76 saying that it is rare. I mean, I don't know how you really want to define moderately rare and very rare, but so the majority of people believe that radicals within the men's movement is not as common as people might think. And I actually agree with that. They're there, just not as prevalent as you might think. Do you find radicals to be an important issue that needs to be addressed as advocates for men's rights? 73% said yes, 9% said somewhat. I agree that they need to be dealt with. We need to police our own. Do you see other supporters of men's rights calling out radicals? 54% somewhat, 54% yes, 34% somewhat. I actually do see this. It's not all the time, but I've seen a couple of groups like on Facebook call people out and say, either discuss with them privately, like, hey, you need to go, you're being destructive, or publicly saying, hey, you need to leave. We can't have you here. once again, policing yourself. And this is something that the men's right does fairly well, much, much better than the feminists do. Now, here's an interesting one. I'm going to read all the results to this one. What do you think is the most inaccurate myth surrounding men's rights? Now, you can only choose one of these, and I think all of them are myths of men's rights. And I think that's kind of the point, but which one's the most inaccurate? So I'm just going to read this down the line. That men have all the rights they need, 31%. That men's rights take away from women's rights, 17%. That men's rights are oppressive, 2%. That only men support men's rights, 2%. That men who support men's rights hate women, 23%. That men who support men's rights are selfish, 1%. Men who support men's rights just want to batter women, 9%. Men who support men's rights are insults, 5%. 10% said other. Now, I'm sure there's going to be some feminist that tries to take away from this and tries to use this to say, well, you know, even though 31% said that men don't believe that men don't have all the rights, they didn't answer all of these other questions, and tries to trick their cultist. The thing to remember about this is you can only choose one, so you had to choose the most inaccurate myth. But, you know, it's likely to be believed that if people could choose multiple ones, all of these would probably be over 80%. Issues that affect predominantly men. Okay, so this is basically a 0 through 10 scale system. The way that I did this, I'm going to read the top two numbers that got results, but basically 8 through 10, I said, are very. 5 through 7 is somewhat, and anything below that is basically a no. Now, you can kind of break that down further, but I've tried to make this as easy as possible. But if you're answering a 4 to a question, you're basically saying that, you know, it's not that important to you, or you basically don't agree with it. So, all right, so how important is male suicide rate to you? The top two was actually 10 and 8. 10 got 35, 8 got 22%. But breaking it down as I have, 77% said very important, 20% said somewhat, and of course 3% said not at all. How important is men defending themselves against female abusers to you? 46% said 10, 20% said 8. My breakdown, 80% said very important, 19% somewhat important. The rest is not at all. How important is the labor death gap to you? That 95% of all work-related accident deaths are male. So the highest was 7 at 21%, and the second was at 8 at 18%. My breakdown is that 44% is very, 46% is somewhat. Only 10% was not at all. From here on out, unless there's something specific I want to talk about, I'll only report not at all if it's above 10% or above. You can just probably assume that it's below 10% if I don't say anything about it at all. Or you can actually do the math with the numbers I'm giving you. So it's about equal, but I mean, if we broke it down a little bit further and just said anyone who said very and somewhat is basically saying yes, and that's still a representation of 90%. But for many, it's not as big of an issue as other things are. How important is sperm liability to you? basically that women can steal a man's sperm, get herself pregnant, and the man is now responsible for a child he did not intend to have. Okay, so the top two, well, there was a lot of tying in this one, but 19% said 5 and 15% said 7. So the breakdown is 39% say that this is very important to them, 47% say somewhat, and 13% say not at all. I think this is an issue that men's right needs to discuss a lot more. Because, I mean, this is a very important one, I think. That, you know, our sperm can be used against us, and we can father children that we didn't intend to, because the court of law says that that's perfectly legal to do. How important are the custody rights of men? The two highest, 10 got a 39% and 8 got a 22%. My breakdown, 78% very important custody rights, 20% somewhat important. How important is eradicating male gender roles to you? 19%, 10, and then tied with 14% at 7, 8, and 9. So 47% find this very important, 33% somewhat, 21% not important at all. How important is the development of male victim shelters to you? Highest was 44% at 10, and second highest was 9 at 17%. So very important was 77%, somewhat was 19%. That's very encouraging right there. How important is the expansion of male birth control options to you? I think this is an extremely important issue. Actually, I think all of them are extremely important, but 29% for 10, 15% for 7. My breakdown, 57% find this very important, 34% find this somewhat important, only 9% for not at all. This is an issue that needs to be discussed more, because we do need male birth control. Feminists are always saying, well, this would take away women's control of birth. How important is banning of infant circumcision to you? 40% said 10, 14% said 9. My breakdown, 65 said that this is very important, 20% said somewhat, 17 said not at all. We need to educate people on this, because we need a lot higher. How important is the sexualization of men in popular culture to you? So the highest was 5 at 23%, and the second highest was 0 at 13%. So the breakdown is 20% very, 42% of somewhat, and 40% not at all. So it's basically tied between somewhat and not at all. I think this is something that also needs to be educated more. I can understand people saying somewhat, but not at all. That's kind of sad. We need to move more people from the not at all into the somewhat camp. How important is the representation of men and boys in popular culture to you? The highest, which was tied between 7 and 8, was at 18%. The next one was at 5 or 15%. So very important is 33%, somewhat important is 47%, and not at all is 19%. It seems like something we also need to educate more on. Because men really, well, that's something that just really needs to be discussed, not necessarily educated. Because on one hand, a lot of the politicians are men, but then at the same time, many of the issues that men face are not talked about as often as they should. Okay, how important is paternity fraud to you? 10% at 10 at 31, and tied for second place with 7 and 9 or 18%. So 63% very, 32% somewhat, 7% not at all. Given that 32% said somewhat, this is one that needs further education in my opinion, because this is also a big issue here. How important are the rights of men accused of sexual crimes to you? 42% said 10, 18% said 8 and 9. So 78% said this is very important, 19% somewhat, 5% not at all. How important is the graduation rate of men to you? 23 said 10, 23% 10, 18% said 9. So the overall conclusion, 55 very important, 36 somewhat important. How important is the diagnosis of ADD in young boys to you? 20% said 5 and 18% said 10. Actually, 20% said 7, 10%. 10 said, 18% said 10. My mind is starting to go. Oh, we're only halfway done. Okay, so 40% feel that this is a very important issue. 45% say somewhat, 16% said none at all. I think this deserves more discussion to be had. Issues that affect predominantly women. Okay, so we're going into a new thing. And this, feminists, is the time for you to wake up from my drizzle and start paying attention. Because you're about to find out, again, predominantly men, predominantly straight, predominantly white people are taking this survey. Not to misrepresent the women and the bisexuals, the gays, the blacks, the Asians, not to misrepresent you. It's fantastic that you took this and that you added on to this, but the group that I named, the straight white males, are under a lot of attack by feminists, and this is an opportunity to really show feminists where the line is drawn. So, how important is the access to abortion services to you? I'm not going to read the top stuff, so I'm just going to read my statistical analysis. 77% very, 18% somewhat. How important is women healthcare services to you? 73% very, 23% somewhat. Kind of surprising. How important is teen pregnancy prevention to you? 71% very, 24% somewhat. How important are body image campaigns for girls to you? 39% very, 44% somewhat, 16% not at all. How important is women entering predominantly male fields to you? 39% very, 43% somewhat, 9% not at all. Women entering predominantly male fields, it's not that big of a deal in my opinion, because it does come down to personal choice. And that's what we're seeing often with women entering in the fields that they do, is what ones are they attracted to, which also affects the wage gap. But many feminists say that women are not welcome in many male-dominated fields, and that's actually not true. So I actually understand where a lot of people are saying somewhat on this one. How important is the underdiagnosis of girls with ADD to you? 30% very, 49% somewhat, 22% not at all. Maybe something worth further discussion. How important is the sexualized women of women in the media to you? 20% very, 42% somewhat, 39% not at all. How important is the state of modeling industry to you? 21% very, 39% somewhat, 41% not at all. I want to talk about this real quick, kind of break this up a little bit. I think I'm starting to have a cold and my throat's really drying out. All right, so, I'm starting to hear a lot of flack. Well, I guess I have been for a very long time, but very recently I heard something about the porn industry and about how abusive it is to women. And, I imagine that if it's abusive to women, it's also abusive to men. And, I'm willing to consider that maybe it's more abusive to women. And here's the kicker. And this is not victim shaming of any way. If someone had a truly bad experience where they were abused within, say, the porn industry, that is bad. There's no excuse for that. However, with the modern technology, we can look up almost any company on the internet to get more information about them. And if you're thinking about going to a certain model agency or going to, I don't know how porn works, but I guess it also has agencies as well, and having an agent or whatever, do your homework. I'm not saying that it's your fault for not doing homework, but it is definitely within. Oh, I got a new subscription on my YouTube. It's definitely something that you need to make yourself more aware of. What's the reputation of this company? What have others said about it? Are they paying you the way they should? Are they trying to take advantage of you? I mean, do your homework. And you might use the excuse, well, I don't have a computer. Go to the library. Look it up there. Try to find other people who know these things online and try to talk about them. And in all honesty, if you're not doing this, you're asking for trouble. Now, again, not victim shaming here, but we live in an age where you can find out information about companies. Be smart. Get yourself information before signing any contracts. I'd rather see porn stars and models protected. If they want to go into this field and they want to make a living doing that, fantastic. But please be smart and please be safe. Do your homework and try to avoid some of the dangerous situations. And if you do get abused, please report it to someone. All right. So, general issues. These aren't really gendered questions, but some people ask them anyways. I'm just going to read the yes and no. I'm not going to, I'll just go through them. Okay, so how important is marijuana legalization to you? 20% said very, 40% somewhat, 33% not at all. How important is increased gun control to you? 32% very, 37% somewhat, 31% not at all. So kind of tied on that one. How important is increasing taxes on the wealthy to you? 54% said very, 28% somewhat, 19% not at all. How important is socialized health care to you? 57% very, 23% somewhat, 18% not at all. Given that I'm disabled, this actually is an important issue for me. How important are issues of race to you? 50% said very, 36% said somewhat, 15% not at all. How important is the issue of dependency on technology to you? 17% said very, 41% somewhat, 42% said not at all. So tied between somewhat and not at all. How important is global warming to you? 53% very, 29% somewhat, 18% not at all. How important is immigration reform to you? 34% very, 47% somewhat, 19% not at all. How important are trans issues to you? Actually, this is a very important question because one of the things that I hear from trans people is the treatment they get from both the MRA and feminism. 53% say very important, 34% somewhat, 13% not at all. How important is education reform to you? 67% very, 25% somewhat. How important is global access to food to you? 69% very, 26% somewhat. How important is overpopulation to you? 44% very, 37% somewhat, 18% not at all. How important are animal rights to you? 44% very, 37% somewhat, 90% not at all. How important is global access to clean water to you? 75% very, 20% somewhat. How important is genocide prevention to you? 76% very, 17% somewhat. How important is police brutality to you? 73% very, 21% somewhat. How important is legislation of hard drugs to you? 15% very, 25% somewhat, 61% not at all. And I kind of agree there. How important is comprehensive sexual education to you? 70% very, 28% somewhat. How important is marriage equality to you? 80% very, 13% somewhat. How important is cultural appropriation to you? 7% very, 25% somewhat, 68% not at all. Something that's worth discussion. How important is government corruption to you? 72% very, 21% somewhat. How important is censorship prevention to you? 74% very, 21% somewhat. How important is government surveillance to you? 55% very, 31% somewhat, 13% not at all. How important is public education to you? 77% very, 19% somewhat. How important is vaccination to you? 73 very, 23 somewhat. How important are sexual orientation minority issues to you? 63% very, 24% somewhat, 13% not at all. How important is online security to you? 68% very, 28% somewhat. How important is green energy to you? 58% very, 31% somewhat, 13% not at all. How important is terrorist prevention to you? 32% very, 37% somewhat, 30% not at all. How important is war prevention to you? 60% very, 32% somewhat. How important are asexual issues to you? Also an important question. 26% very, 38% somewhat, 37% not at all. How important is violence in video games to you? 3% very, 14% somewhat, 81% not at all. How important is conscription to you, selective service? 38% very, 40% somewhat, 23% not at all. Something that needs to go into further discussion. Okay, so this... I need to take my inhaler. My throat's seriously drying up. Oh. Sorry about this. Okay, a little bit better. This section was dedicated to women who are not feminist. Now, part of this actually had women who were asked, well, basically, did you ever identify as feminist? And this section is not, the percentages are not equaling up to 100%. So I'm actually going to read the number of people who said the various responses to this. So 50%, 56 said yes, 31 said no. It's the same percent, so you have to catch me on that. So it also then asks, if so, why did you stop identifying as feminist? And there was a list of things that women had said. I'm not going to read this here. I'm actually going to save this for the second video of why did women stop being feminists? Because there's a lot of important things said here, and I want to read all of them. I was going to read out a select few, but now I want to read all of them. I may not read this for future sense when I get more results in. Depends if I get one or two that's important. But let's go ahead and skip to the next one. Why do you not identify with feminist? 38 said that they don't agree with core feminist theories. 57 said they don't agree with priorities of feminists. 69 say they disagree with how feminist handles or does not handle its radicals. 24 24 people said that they do not identify with feminists because they do not think that it's relevant anymore. 30 do not think that feminism is needed in their area. 40 have been mistreated by the feminist community. Now, these are women, remind you. 43 said they do not want to be associated with a movement that with a history of homophobia. 42 said they don't want to be associated with a movement with a history of transphobia. 38 said associated with a movement with a history of racism. 36 feel that their lifestyle is unwelcome in feminist circles, and then 8 people said something else. Have you ever been successfully or unsuccessfully guilted into identifying as feminist? 49 said yes, 26 no. Have you ever been told that you don't know what real feminism is by feminists? 62 said yes, 13 no. Have you ever been told that you should be grateful to feminism by feminists? 59 said yes, 16 said no. Have you ever been told to support feminism because of the accomplishments of past feminist waves? 61% said yes, 13 said no. Starting to really notice a pattern here. Do radical feminists count as real feminists? 59 women said yes, 16 said no. Have you ever been told that you must want to be stuck in traditional gender roles because you're not feminist? 50 have said yes, 25 said no. Have you ever been told that you are working against your own self-interest by not being a feminist? 62 yes, 13 no. Do you think you are working against your own self-interest by not being a feminist? 2 said yes, 2 said maybe, 71 said no. Do you think that feminism is a good representation of your interest? 2 said yes, 5 said maybe, 68 said no. Have you ever been told you should feel as a woman, how you should feel as a woman by feminist women? 59 yes, 16 no. Have you been told how you should feel as a woman by feminist men? 36 yes, 39 no. Do you feel as though feminists as a whole supports non-feminist women? 4 said yes, 71 no. Do you think non-feminist women are met with by feminists? And this had a scale of 1 through 5. So no said was 1%. Somewhat is 2%, and the rest, which was yes, is 40%. Do you believe feminism is still needed in your area? 3 said yes, 27 said maybe, 45 said no. Has your gender ever been questioned by feminists because you are not a feminist? 36 said yes, 39 said no. More than likely, those that say no, I'm betting those feminists already knew what their gender was. If so, how often does it occur? How often is your gender questioned? 1 and 2, which is not at all, was 7%, 2% for somewhat, and 13. Oh wait, I'm reading that wrong. Sorry. 6. So not at all was 13, 3 for somewhat, and 22 people said it often occurs. Have you ever been told by a feminist that you are not a feminist because you want male attention? 33 said yes, 39 said no. Again, these are number of women saying this, not percentages. Have you ever been told by a feminist that you are not a feminist because of internalized misogyny? 50 said yes, 23 no. Have you ever been told by a feminist that you are not a feminist because you are an uneducated or ignorant? 57 said yes, 15 no. Yeah, well, I'll save this for the end, but have you been told by a feminist that you are not feminist because of some other sexist reason? 47 yes, 24 no. Have you ever seen a social media post that talks about non-feminist women in any of the 4 ways mentioned above? 70 yes, 3 no. How do you feel feminists has contributed to your area? So feminist has contributed positively, 11, contributed negatively, 27, has neither been positive or negative, 9, and they're unsure is 38. Do you feel as though feminists generally respect freedom of speech when it's used to speak about unfeminist ideas? 1 yes, 8 somewhat, 64 said no, not at all. Do you feel as though feminists generally respect conservative women? Oh, someone from, hold on, just one sec. A very good friend of mine is just talking about something. I don't know if they're reacting to what I'm saying or not. Okay, so do you feel as though feminists generally respect conservative women? 1 yes, 15 somewhat, 57 not at all. Do you feel as though feminists generally respect anti-choice women? 1 said yes, 13 somewhat, 59 not at all. Do you feel as though feminists generally respect stay-at-home mothers? 1 yes, 44 somewhat, 28 no, not at all. Do you feel as though feminists generally respect men? 0 said yes, 19 said somewhat, 54 not at all. In what ways do you believe that feminists generally have incorporated race issues? 5% say that they've incorporated them well, 3% said not, and 33% said poor. Sorry for this. Okay, so returning back. In what way do you believe that feminists generally have incorporated trans issues? Oh, I used percentages again to deny. No. So let's go back to the race issues. 9 said well, 6 said it does not incorporate, and 58 said that they believe that they've done it very poorly. Okay, so trans issues. 9 said that they've put them in very well. 3 said not incorporated. And 61 said very poorly. Are you a trans woman? 70 said no, 3 said yes. So of the transgendered women, it was asked, has your identity as a woman ever been erased by feminists? 3 said yes. I don't really know what that means. I apologize. If your identity has been erased, how often is it erased by feminists? I guess basically not acknowledged by feminists. 1 said somewhat, and 2 said yes, or rather very often. How have you been referred to as an Have you ever been referred to as an enemy or oppressor by feminists? 3 said yes. So we only have 3 trans women in this, and all 3 have been basically seen as the enemy or not acknowledged at all. Do you believe that feminism has adequately addressed the issue of the issues transgendered women face? 7 said no. Do you feel as though feminism is open and welcome to transgendered women? 7 said no. Harassment, mistreatment, and erasure. So it's a new section. Whew. Have you ever had your intelligence insulted for supporting men's rights? So we're going back to percentage of this since it now equals to 100%. 75% said yes, that their intelligence has been insulted for supporting men's rights. Have you ever been told to kill yourself for supporting men's rights? 57% said no to this one. So that's good. At least feminists have some standard. Oh, I wanted to talk about the women addressing. We're noticing a pattern here that women are more often than not feminists, or women are being affected by feminists in a pretty bad way. Now, I'm glad that some are not experiencing this. That makes me very happy. But it also makes me very disappointed at the same time that there are women who are being affected by feminist groups. They're basically being told, like you're an enemy of us, or internalized misogyny, or you just want men to pay attention to you. And I see this on Tumblr. So it's good to actually have some numbers on this. And I'm glad that women have participated in this because, if a man says something about feminists just blow it off. And then try to say that all women are oppressed. And here's an opportunity for women to stand up. It's like, fuck you, you stupid feminists. This is the truth. So in many of the cases we saw that was overwhelming, women, non-feminists, are treated badly by feminists. So, all right, let's go back to the new section of harassment and mistreatment and erasure. All right, has anyone wished death, assault, or some horrific instance upon you for supporting men's rights? 53% said no. Have you ever had personal details about you leaked online for supporting men's rights? 95% said no. It does happen though. 5% or 8 people said yes, and I'm glad that this is not happening at a higher rate. That makes me very happy, but the fact that it happens at all is abhorrent. It makes me angry that this is a tactic that feminists and anti-Gamergates resort to first and foremost when it comes to dealing with someone they don't agree with. Let's reveal their personal information. In fact, there's a recent thing about Plem Comics that the female artist who did this got fired from her job because I guess there was like a lot of porn emails that were sent to her company in her name. That was just awful. Have you lost friends because you support men's rights? 59% said no, although 41 did say yes, and that was like 72 people. And it's sad that that has to happen. It's not that people can have difference of opinion. It's that, well, you support men's rights, so you're awful. We don't want to be friends with you anymore. And that's so childish. How often do you receive harassment for supporting men's rights? This is another 1 to 5 question. 63 said that they don't really receive, well, they basically receive no harassment. 23 say they somewhat receive harassment. 14% say they receive a lot. If you receive harassment, how severe is it? 36% say it's not really that severe. 24% say somewhat. 16% say it's very severe. If you receive harassment, where do you receive it? 63% says mostly or entirely online. If you receive online harassment, where do you receive it? 63% on Tumblr, 21% on Facebook, 14% on Tumblr, and 8% on Reddit, 6% for other. If you receive online harassment, has anyone ever sent or instructed other people to harass you? 48% say no. Actually, that doesn't equal up to 100. So 84 people have said no, 37% said yes. Sometimes you don't equal up to 100. Most of the time they do. Has your race ever been assumed to be white for supporting men's rights? 72% said yes. Have you ever been assumed to be a man for supporting men's rights? 79 said yes. Have you ever been assumed to be cisgender for supporting men's rights? 75 say yes. Has your sexual or romantic identity ever been assumed to be heterosexual romantic for supporting men's rights? 74 say yes. Has your political affiliation ever been assumed to be right-wing or conservative for supporting men's rights? 63 say yes. All right, let's get through all of this. It's not important. There was a question here. If you could educate people on the importance of men's rights into a couple of sentences, what would you say? I'm going to do a video on this because there's a lot to be said here. There's some final things left to be said here. Have you ever suffered from chronic mental illness? 92 say yes, 71 no. Have you ever been sexually assaulted? I'm surprised it doesn't ask about rape, but 62 say yes, 100 say no. Have you ever been physically assaulted? 90 say yes, 74 say no. Have you ever been a victim of domestic violence? 45 say yes, 115 say no. Now, these are people saying this, not percentages. Have you ever been addicted to alcohol or other drugs? 16 say no, 146 say 16 say yes, 146 say no. Do you have any physical or mobility disabilities? 18 say yes, 146 say no. And that's it. That's the entire survey. So this is an education for everyone, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm going to be following this. We only had 175 people respond to this, but I still think it's a very good sampling size, considering that many feminist academic surveys have less than that. Some don't even have 100. Some things that we can take away from this is that feminists tend to assume that everyone is a cis white, straight male. That they tend to hate women that speak against feminism, and that us men, actually do care about a lot of women issues. We care strongly about, well, I don't know about necessarily strongly, I can't see all the results, but we do care about women's issues. We do care about women. We do care about asexuals. We do care about transgender. And not just that, but all non-feminists, which is what this survey is representing. We do care about these issues. Feminists, you have it wrong. I'll say that again. Feminists, you have it wrong. We want equality between men and women, where men and women can reach their full potential. We don't, as men's rights activists, and I guess I'm slowly being assimilated by them, I'm still an egalitarian now. I mean, most people were egalitarian that took this. But as egalitarians, as men's rights, as non-feminists, as anti-feminists, we care about these issues. It's the feminists who try to convince everyone that we don't, that we're evil, that we're bad. And trying so hard to convince us that what they're actually describing is themselves. And they don't even realize it. That your movement has done a lot of damage. And here is the evidence of what people think of you. Honestly, to anyone who's listening to this, go take the survey. Help push these numbers up. If we get to 250, I'll do another video on this. If we get to 350, I'll do another video on this. If we get to 500, I'll do another video on this. If we get to 1,000, I will definitely do a video on this. I would like to see as many people take this as possible, because we need to speak with a voice that feminists can understand. Feminists only think in numbers, it seems. Let's show them some numbers. Let's, come together, take this survey and show people what the truth is. Because they don't want to listen to words. We can tell them till we're blue in the face where everything stands, and they won't listen. Oh, it's just a bunch of words. Throw some fucking numbers at them. Take this survey. I can't stress it enough. I wish I designed it, in all honesty, because this is fantastic. And I think the person who did it, I'm not entirely sure who did it at this very moment, but I'll try to find out. But this was a brilliant survey done, and I'm very happy for it. Like I said, I'm going to do a video on the responses that women left on why they are no longer feminist. I'm also going to do responses of what men have to say in respect to what men's rights is about. So I know this was a little bit dry. I apologize. I was mostly reading statistical analysis, but this is some important stuff. And there are a couple of issues out there that we need to, further educate people on as men's rights activists. We need to talk about more, to bring awareness to these issues. And this survey definitely tells us where we need to do those things. Anyways, this is Mad Cat signing off.